Welcome to Episode 1 of the Security Professionals Podcast, Sidearm Selection with Massad Ayoob. Welcome to the very first episode of the Security Professionals Podcast. This is your weekly source of news, tips, and education for the security specialist. I'm your host, Alex Haddox, and this is Episode 1, Sidearm Selection with Massad Ayoob. Well, with this initial episode, we are out of the gate with a hot one. We have a legend for our first guest, Massad Ayoob. Honestly, I'm a little nervous about this show since Mass is one of the best guests ever, and where do I go from here? I just hope the rest of this show can maintain the high expectations this initial episode represents. I do a little bit of an introduction of Mass when I start the interview, but I've been a fan of his for years. I read all of his books, buy his DVDs, I've had the pleasure to train under him, and I've hosted one of his seminars. He is a great and generous man and considered a world expert in firearms, self-defense, and self-defense law. There are few people I respect as much as him. He's also been very kind to me with his comments regarding some of my books, and that means a great deal to me. He's the author of some of the classic books, including The Truth About Personal Protection, In the Gravest Extreme, and his recent book that is flying off the shelves, Deadly Force: Understanding Your Right to Self-Defense. In fact, we use his new book as a reference piece in our CCW courses. We hand it out as part of our lecture material to students. I strongly recommend buying and studying his books. Remember that as private security, we are held to the civilian use of force standards, and his books are about the use of force and self-defense for the average person. In the interview, which I'll play in just a second here, Mass and I chat about the selection criteria for a service firearm for security. The discussion is focused on open carry for on-duty private security. However, many of the concepts and decision points also apply to the private citizen who carries concealed for personal protection. And here's the interview. Are you looking to run your own security guard training school? Check out guardcardtraining.com. We have state-approved security guard training materials, professionally printed and bound student manuals, PowerPoint presentations, knowledge checks, and final exams. Everything you need to run your own program. Just open the box and start teaching. guardcardtraining.com. Welcome back. And today we have a fantastic guest. We have Massad Ayoob on. Now, for those that don't know him, Massad Ayoob is a prolific author with many books that have set the standard for firearms training for law enforcement as well as civilians. In the Gravest Extreme is one of his top books. It's been around for a long time. There's The Truth About Personal Protection and all sorts of other different books, that so many that I can't even remember all of them right now. He's also been a firearms instructor for many, many decades. And he's been a law enforcement firearms instructor and a civilian firearms instructor. He used to run the Lethal Force Institute for 29 years and then split off and started his own group, the Massad Ayoob Group, and you can find that at massadayoob.com. And he's been on the advisory board for many national and international law enforcement agencies. And to top it off, he's also been a law enforcement officer for 39 years so far. So thanks for coming on, Mass.
Hey, it's good to be back, Alex. The gang at the Pro Arms podcast sends their best regards, by the way, to you and your listeners.
Thanks. Absolutely. That's a great show as well. So what we would like to delve into your experience about in this show, in our first show, is firearms, believe it or not. So what we have the questions for you is like, how do you select a firearm to carry while on duty?
Well, first you've got to look at whether it's going to be a personally owned weapon, privately owned, department approved, or whether it's going to be an issue gun. When I've had a hand in picking the issue gun, what we've always had to do is make sure we have something that will fit the hands of the smallest officers, the largest, and everyone in between. You want to base it on your particular needs, not necessarily generic security or law enforcement needs. For example, the three departments that I've served have all been in four-season climates. And when you've got a winter that lasts about 5 months, and everybody you meet is likely to be wearing heavy clothing, you have to consider that even the best hollow point bullets can plug when they're filled with an inert fabric and essentially turn into ball ammo. My feeling was if my guy's ammo 5 months out of the year might turn into ball, I wanted it to turn into big ball. So every time I cast my vote for the 45 caliber, and fortunately every time they listened, and that's what my agency issues now. That's what I've carried on duty since 1988 is issue guns. And frankly, carried prior to that most of the time is privately owned, department approved.
Okay, I think in the private security industry, almost in every situation, it's going to be privately owned and carried on duty. A lot of the guys come in, and when they do their qualifications, it's all privately owned.
It actually seems to depend on the agency. There are some, particularly in Florida, for example, there are a number of agencies that will issue the weapon. I still see around the country departments or security agencies where they're still with the 38 Special revolver, the feeling being that they have minimum budget for training. The revolver is somewhat easier to learn in terms of administrative handling, routine cleaning, and that sort of thing. And hell, at one time in Florida, the private security were mandated to 38 caliber revolvers with round nose ammunition. That's over, thank goodness. But security in general, with some exceptions, has tended to lag behind law enforcement in that respect. That said, some of the higher-end security agencies have been far ahead of the law enforcement mainstream. So there are definitely two ends of that bell curve.
What about full-size versus compact? I know because you're going to be carrying it all day long, and it's going to get heavy over time. You know, the old saying is that ounces become pounds over time.
It's going to tend to depend on the assignment. One of the reasons the Glock became so popular, first in law enforcement and subsequently in private security, is the polymer frame makes the gun much lighter. It certainly does reduce that burden, particularly when you're working in uniform with a duty belt and you have handcuffs, you have ammunition, you have a radio, you may have a taser, you may have a baton. You can get the duty belt, particularly if it's the old-fashioned leather Sam Browne, can start getting up in the 15, 17-pound range. And you've got that kind of weight on you, riding on your hips all day. It's one reason why uniformed personnel who have to carry that kind of gear have the occupational hazard of lower back problems. It's not just the higher likelihood that they're going to be in a fight or injured doing some other strenuous activity. It's that absolute constant heavy weight around the belt line for 40 or more hours a week. So lightweight is a factor. Compact size, not necessarily. Today, your full-size service Glock pistol unloaded weighs about 22, 23 ounces. That, in the old days, was the weight of a snub-nosed 38, like the Colt Detective Special. So modern technology has allowed us to lighten the service weapons and to lighten many other things. The radios we used to carry were bigger than sidewalk bricks, and today they're certainly much more compact. But the private security who's working plainclothes, executive protection, is going to need something concealable, but they've also got to remember that if they're in a situation where they're being paid the big bucks to bodyguard somebody, they're being paid the big bucks for a reason. There's somebody out there that wants to kill those people, and you've got to keep the constant vigilance that one day somebody's going to try. When that happens, you want the most shootable gun with the most cartridges in it and the most powerful cartridges that you can manage, not the smallest, lightest thing that does not bulge the Armani suit.
Interesting. Okay. Now, in terms of caliber, you mentioned the 45. My experience is here in California, the most popular calibers that the private security agencies are looking for are qualifications in 9mm and 40, S&W 40.
Well, the 9mm is because of its light recoil, is certainly the easiest semi-auto pistol to teach someone to shoot, assuming that the design factors are the same. The 40 is actually a bit snappier in terms of recoil than the 40 because it's a much higher pressure round. So each agency has the balance of, controllability versus power. How much power do we think in our particular threat profile we're going to need? How high a volume of gunfire based on historical incidents of people doing this kind of job in this kind of place? How many rounds is our security officer going to need when he steps out of that Brinks truck and here comes the guy with the ski mask and the gun? So whatever the particular job might be has to interface with what are the skill levels of the personnel. What is the training budget? Do we have bean counters that are limiting you to, okay, the state says you have to qualify once a year with at least 36 rounds. Okay, 36 cartridges per year, once a year. That's it, fellas. Or do you have a unit that realizes their most precious asset is their personnel, and they're willing to pay to keep those personnel proficient in life-saving skills? The 45 is not the easiest gun to master, neither is the 40. In a 9mm, you have the easiest gun to qualify with, the easiest gun to master, and because of the dimensions of the cartridges in the same size gun, you'll probably have more rounds on board. In the standard size Glocks, the most popular brand today, the 9mm Glock 17 holds 18 rounds. The 40 caliber Glock 22 holds 16. The large frame Glock and the Model 21 and 45 ACP holds 14. And if you want a gun the same size and grip frame as the 17 and the 22 and 9mm and 40, you're looking at the Glock Model 37 and 45 gap. And that's only 10 in the magazine, one more in the chamber. So there's always going to be that balance of firepower in terms of round count versus firepower in terms of the potency of the individual cartridge.
I always thought you were a Smith & Wesson person, but you just keep going back to the Glock. Why is that?
Well, I'm a gun person. I'll tell you a funny story. When they contacted me to write the Gun Digest book of Sig Sauer, I found out that at a 6-hour board meeting, somebody announced that I was going to be writing that book. And one of the executives said, "My God, they can't have him write that book about us. He's a Glock guy." And I laughed because I am a Glock guy and a SIG guy and a Smith & Wesson guy. Alex, I'm a gun guy.
Okay.
I feel about the different guns like Archie with Betty and Veronica. I like them all. It's just one might be better suited for this state and another one better suited for that. I mentioned the Glock because it is by far the most commonly seen pistol in law enforcement today, between 60 and 70% market saturation. And it is the single semi-automatic pistol I most often see in the holsters of security professionals as well.
And it is very
Glock
affordable.
9mm is what Blackwater issued its people going overseas. It's simply as the Smith & Wesson revolver was back when I started. The Glock semi-automatic today is simply the most common gun that your students are going to bring to class to learn to use.
Yeah, we do see a lot of them, and the guns that we provide for requalification, if they haven't brought their own in with them, are primarily Glocks.
Well, there you go.
Now let's talk ammo a little bit more. You mentioned in the 45 you wanted to go with a hollow point. Is that still the case with the 40?
I would want a hollow point in any issue cartridge. The so-called Geneva Convention bullet, the full metal jacket, generally with a round nose, the non-expanding projectile, it borders on criminal negligence to be issuing that for protective services of any kind today. A bullet like that will go through 24 to 26 inches of muscle tissue simulating ballistic gelatin. And when you extrapolate that to human bodies, that's 3 people in a row through and through the first 2 and lodging center chest in the third one. They're very ricochet prone. And because of the shape of the projectile, over the years, it's become infamous for its poor stopping power. You'll find a great many of our soldiers and Marines coming back from more than a decade overseas now in the current conflict will tell you they liked the Beretta pistol. They absolutely hated the round. Last month, I interviewed a young vet who had emptied his 16-shot Beretta into an Al-Qaeda terrorist before the man went down. and then the guy fell on the 16th shot. And it was a miracle that between shot 1 and shot 16, he didn't kill this young Marine. And the problem there lies not with the 9mm, it lies with the selection of the ammunition. You get this very narrow ice-pick wound profile. It kills, but it does not stop unless you hit central nervous system, which is a pretty hard shot to make and a pretty iffy thing. The hollow point bullets are designed to open up inside the body. You hear them referred to as mushrooming. And the bullet does take on a mushroom shape, but to understand this factor better, that same shape is the shape of a parachute. As the bullet widens, it encounters a larger swath of tissue. It slows down the projectile, and the bullet's much less likely to exit and strike an unseen innocent bystander. Because it is staying in the body and is widening, it does significantly more damage, and historically has tended to stop fights a good bit faster than round-nose jacketed. And finally, if it stops the fight faster, it means it stopped it with fewer rounds. And you can make a very good argument that it's literally more humane for the guy you have to shoot, simply because he's shot fewer times, he has fewer wound tracks going through the body, and fewer vital organs have been disrupted.
I've never quite heard it put that way. It's more humane for the person being shot.
Well, it's not something people tend to look at. It seems counterintuitive when you're talking about fighting for your life. And people associate that with the classic phrase from Colonel Applegate in World War II, kill or be killed. For us today, it's looking at it both tactically and legally. Our job is not to kill the other guy. Our job is to stop the other guy from doing whatever horrible thing warrants us shooting him with a deadly weapon in the first place. By the way, another advantage of the hollow point is because of the shape of it, it's less likely to ricochet.
Yeah, that's very important. The overpenetration and ricocheting is a real issue when you're out on the street.
Of course it is. It's no responsible gun owner would ever go to an indoor range and fire armor-piercing bullets he knew would go through and through the backstop. It appalls me that people will carry ammunition they know will go through and through the only backstop they'll have on the street, which is the body of the offender.
Let's talk training. You know, there in almost every single state that I'm aware of that allows for private security to carry armed requires a certain amount of training. In California, it is an additional 14-hour training on top of the basic 40. In Texas, the firearms training is included as part of the 40. What type of training above and beyond should they get from above the minimum state requirements?
Well, police, by contrast, will generally get a minimum of 40 hours just on firearms and deadly force before they leave the academy. An FBI agent will get twice that. I recommend for private citizens, before I sign a piece of paper that says I consider them competent to carry a gun, a 40-hour program. You know, some of it will be shooting. Some of it will be the classroom program that you took an intensive version of.
Okay, now that goes above and beyond what even the NRA offers for pistols, because the NRA courses are 10, 12 hours long. So where would they go beyond to find that type of training?
You'll find there's more good training than ever around the country now. Certainly the name schools, Gun Sight, Chapman Academy has reopened in the Midwest, our school on the East Coast, SIG Academy in New Hampshire, which does accept private citizens and has special programs for security personnel. There's good training to be found everywhere. And in the time of the internet, you don't have to believe the guys advertising. You can just go on the internet and see what people who've taken the training have to say. The internet has become the Carfax, if you will, for people looking to buy training instead of automobiles.
And of course, I'll plug you right here with the Massad Ayoob group. And you travel around the country doing all these different types of seminars in 20, 40, and 80-hour formats.
We do. We literally cover the four corners and the heartland in a given year.
And I have taken and hosted your MAG 20 course, and it was just one of the best training experiences I've ever had in my life.
Thank you.
Now, what about professional associations? I know private security, they have the ASIS, and that's beyond, and that's the international organization. But what about firearms organizations for civilians and professional security?
On strictly the firearm side for professionals, there are two organizations I'd strongly recommend that your listeners in that profession join. One would be ILETA, the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. Security professionals are welcome there, even though it's geared for law enforcement, because the actual training and the actual function of the weapon that is the actual use of the weapon, is very similar in both jobs. ILETA is right now at about 7,000 members. The last conference I attended was 700. And it brings in the best and the brightest in a number of tracks. It's geared for instructors. In fact, you have to be an instructor to join. And the tracks will cover everything from the psychology of adult learning to a lot of hand-to-hand. I think you would enjoy attending one of their seminars. And also they have a very strong track on firearms and deadly force training. Your listeners can reach out to them at their website, www.ileeta.org. The other would be ILFE, the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. Those who are not in law enforcement are welcome to join as associate members. And the only difference in an associate membership and a full membership is the full members get to vote on the board of directors. They have regional and national seminars every year. Their focus is entirely on weapons and deadly force. And it's a tremendous resource. It's either of those is the difference between going to a dojo one night a week versus taking an intensive 5-day seminar from the top professionals in the given field. And IALEFI, ILFE, and ILETA are the two that I would definitely recommend for anyone involved in training armed security personnel, whether it's executive protection or uniformed security.
Okay, great. Those are great recommendations, and I'll include links to both of those places in the show notes.
Great.
As well as
it's MassadAyoobGroup.com.
MassadAyoobGroup.com. Okay, Mass. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing all of your experience with us. It's been very insightful.
Always a pleasure, my friend, and thank you for the great job you're doing for your listeners out there.
Oh, thanks. Well, compliments from you mean a lot. Everyone compares himself to Massad Ayoob. I mean, you are the pinnacle of all of this.
Well, I'm embarrassed to hear that. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
I guess that means I'll have to behave in public now.
I'm certain Gail will keep you in line. She's good at that.
Her title is adult supervisor.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Mass.
Thank you, my friend. Be safe.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again to Mass for taking the time to share his invaluable insights with us. And again, you can find his amazing books everywhere, including Amazon.com. He's also part of the Pro Arms podcast, which is available on iTunes. Well, that will do it for this episode of the Security Professionals Podcast. If you have any tips you'd like to share with everyone, a comment on a show, or if you would like to suggest a topic for an upcoming episode, write into podcast@security-training-center.com. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 909-742-0649. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe.
I'm Peyton Manning. On the football field, I always have to prepare for the unexpected. My teammates and I train to think fast and be ready ahead of the game. You can be ready with the help of your local American Red Cross. The American Red Cross can help all of us prepare for life's emergencies. Take life-saving CPR or first aid courses. Make an emergency plan, or learn how to build a disaster supplies kit. Contact the American Red Cross today.
Call 1-800-HELP-NOW or visit redcross.org to learn more.
The Security Professionals Podcast is copyright Security Training Center, LLC. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. An archive of previous episodes can be found at security-training-center.com/podcast. podcast.